morning. Hello, everyone. I'm Kelsey Nelson, the Senior Manager of External Relations here at Learning Heroes, and I'd like to welcome you all to this interactive conversation based on our recently released survey, out-of-school time programs, paving the way for children to find passion, purpose, and voice. In our hour together today, we will recap some research insights, and then have a broader conversation about the new playbook that we're so excited that we just released. Today, I'll be serving as your moderator. We hope today's presentation helps you think about how parents, teachers, and program providers perceive the role of out-of-school time programs in children's social, emotional, and academic development. We also hope it will encourage you to spend time with the new playbook and the suite of creative assets that can help you effectively communicate the value of quality OST or extracurricular programs. Now we do have just a quick few reminders so we can get started with today's program. First, all attendees are on mute. So if you want to communicate with any of the panelists today, please use the chat box function, which you all can find on your Zoom. The webinar is also being recorded, so we wanted you all to know that. And this recording will be shared with all attendees, as well as a link to the playbook this week. So don't be worried if you feel like you missed anything or if you have more questions. Finally, this is meant to be an interactive conversation, so we want to hear from you. So please chime in throughout the conversation using our chat box or Q&A, as you all have been doing. It's so great to see so many people joining us from near and far. At the end of the presentation, we will be sure to answer any questions that you may have. So please think of those questions, put them in the chat box, and again, we'll be sure to answer them. Now, before we dive deep into the program, we'd like to thank you all for joining us today. It means so much to have you all here, and a very special thanks to the Wallace Foundation for supporting this research and being a great partner throughout. We would also like to thank our content partners, the After School Alliance, the Forum for Youth Investment, National PTA, UnidosUS, National Urban League, and the National After School Association, as well as our key advisors that you all can see on the screen. And finally, we'd also like to thank our research partner, EDGE. So with that, let's begin. And we wanted to give you all another question for our wonderful audience members to gauge your interest in today's conversation. You all should see it in the chat now. But we wanted to ask you, what would you like to learn from today's interactive conversation? And please put your answers in the chat, because we do want to make sure that we're going to go over everything that you all want to learn today. All right, I'm starting to see the answers come in. Yes, please, anything that you'd like to learn from today. Again, it's going to be interactive, so we do want to hear from you. Please put it in the chat box. And we want to make sure that we get a chance to go over it today in our hour together. All right, thank you everyone so much for your participation, and so glad that much of you all are eager to learn today. We actually will be going over in today's presentation, and we will be covering that. So to start, I want to welcome David Park, Learning Heroes Senior Vice President of Strategy and Communications, to join me now on our Zoom.
Great, thank you so much, Kelsey. It's great to be here, and I just wanted to reiterate the thanks to everybody that we have assembled for this webinar. I was able to take a look at the list, the roster that we had assembled, and it's really amazing. We've got so many great people representing a lot of different organizations. We've got advocates, we've got educators, we've got people in the OST and after school space. We've got a lot of folks from the PTA. We've got philanthropic organizations and media organizations represented. And that's terrific, just because the playbook is something that can be used by all kinds of audiences. So we feel like we have something for everyone.
Completely agree. It's great to see that we're well represented in our audience today. And David, thanks again for joining us. And David, to kick things off and to start, can you describe the purpose of this research and why it was such an important undertaking for Learning Heroes?
I sure can, Kelsey. So we know that learning happens everywhere, in school, at home, and in the community. And it's important that this learning is connected and that families partner not just with their teachers, which is incredibly important, as we all know, but also with out-of-school time program providers, and that OST programs in schools are connected in service of a child's learning. So I like to think of this as a web of support. And so Learning Heroes is all about strengthening this web and giving parents and families and educators the resources that can help them support children's learning and development. So we conducted this research to answer your question, to understand how parents, teachers, and program providers view the role of OST programs play in children's social, emotional, and academic development, and to inform communications, policies, and programs. So we wanted to understand the unique role that different settings play in a child's development, so we can think more about the opportunities to connect these settings. And we also wanted to better understand how parents chose OST programs and how they assessed quality in OST programs. And finally, we know the last year and a half has been incredibly difficult for everyone, especially families and parents and children and teachers. And so we wanted to understand how the pandemic has impacted these programs now and in the future. And obviously, I'm just going to give sort of a top line report on the data, but there's so much data, so much really rich data that we encourage you to take a look at through the playbook. And so if you haven't already taken a look at the playbook, we strongly encourage you to do that. And we hope you'll use some of the assets that we're going to talk about later on in this webinar.
Thank you, David. And speaking of data, let's dig into it. Can you talk a little bit about the methodology and highlight some of the high-level findings and insights from the research?
Yeah, sure can. So this next slide, if we can pull it up, this is the methodology slide, and it's packed with information, and I'm not going to cover it in detail now, but I did want to give you a quick overview because this was a significant piece of research. So as we mentioned, our research partner is Edge Research, and the project had 3 phases. So the first phase was in-depth qualitative research, where we conducted focus groups, dyads, and in-depth interviews with parents of children who were in K through 8. And we also spoke with K through 8 students, K through 8 teachers, and OST providers. And these focus groups, this qualitative research, was obviously done online since it was during the pandemic. So this fed into the second phase, which is the development of the survey, which was fielded in February and March of this year. So it was a large-scale survey with a sample size of 3,000 people, representing 2,000 K through 8 parents and guardians and 1,000 professionals, both teachers and OST or extracurricular providers. And then finally, in May and June of this year, we did qualitative follow-up to pressure test our findings, including one focus group with K through 8 teachers, a focus group with parents whose kids were in OST programs, and one focus group of parents whose kids were not in OST programs. So we can look at the differences in their perceptions. And we also did 6 in-depth interviews with district leaders. And we were very intentional, as we always are, about recruiting a diverse group of people, including OST providers across diverse settings, and interviews and the survey were both conducted in both English and Spanish. So if you're interested, I really encourage you to review this slide in the research deck that's included in the playbook. And if you have questions, we've got a dedicated email, ostresearch@learningheroes.org, with any questions you have about the research or about the playbook, and we'll be sure to get back to you very quickly. So in terms of the key insights, as Kelsey was asking from the survey, we've categorized those insights into 3 buckets, if you will. So communications is the first bucket, then policy, and finally programmatic. So let me start with communication. So we found that parents and teachers see a very specific and unique role for OST programming. And this is really important for anybody who's communicating about the value of extracurricular programs. So they see this specific and unique role for extracurricular, which provides a differentiated child-centered experiences. So let's think about this. So schools can be very structured, and home has its own culture where different skills and attributes can be developed. But extracurricular and out of school time in parents' minds is a place where kids can develop their passion, their purpose, and their voice, hence the name for this research. Then from a policy perspective, especially at this moment in time, parent responses suggest that participation in high quality out of school time or extracurricular programs is not equitably distributed. And there were significant differences in parent perceptions of parents who have kids in OST programs and those who don't have kids in similar programs. So this is important as there is more funding available for these programs. And as an infusion of new thinking goes into these programs, we need to prioritize equitable access so that more kids have access to these critical programs. And we can tell how valuable they are just because of the parents' responses whose kids are involved in these programs already. And finally, where it all comes together is the programmatic. So we have a unique opportunity now to develop and strengthen that web of support that I talked about at the beginning, where parents, teachers, and providers can partner to support parents' top priority for their child, which is their social and emotional well-being. So to provide a little bit more detail about some of the insights, I'd like to play a short video, which is one of the assets that you can use in the playbook to showcase this research and inform your networks about the value of OST programs, as well as some of the obstacles for parents who may not have access. I will say that this video is hot off the press, meaning we just got it literally from the company that developed it about an hour ago. And so we've still got some editing for it, but we thought we would show it to you so you can get an idea for this terrific asset that you'll be able to use.
Learning Heroes, with the support from the Wallace Foundation, conducted a national survey of more than 2,000 K-8 parents and guardians, more than 600 K-8 public school teachers, and nearly 400 out-of-school time extracurricular or after-school program providers. Learning Heroes wanted to understand the role these programs play and the opportunities they offer beyond the school day. The survey found that 65% of parents enroll their children in at least one out-of-school time program. Parents say they enroll their children to expose them to new experiences, ideas, and perspectives, and to help them find their passion, purpose, and voice. Parents also prioritize programs where their children are safe, feel nurtured and welcomed, and most of all, come home happy. Across race, ethnicity, and income levels, parents with children in these programs say their kids do better academically and are more prepared for the next school year and for college. Many teachers also see significant value in extracurricular programs. They agree these programs expose students to new experiences and say programs motivate students to get excited about learning and to grow in ways beyond core academics. But despite many benefits, programs remain out of reach for some families, often due to cost, time, and transportation issues. Demand for out-of-school time activities is high among all families. Let's expand partnerships between districts and program providers to ensure equitable access to quality programs for all children. For more information on the report, visit www.bealearninghero.org/OST-research.
David, thanks so much for getting us that video hot off the press. I hope you all enjoyed that short video. Please note that the video, as well as the playbook content, can be found on our website at bealearninghero.org/OST-research. And also you can head to our website and click on the research tab. Now, David, to get back to you, I'd finally like to ask you to walk us through the playbook as we dive deeper into this research.
Great, I'd love to. First, let me tell you that, again, kind of no matter what your role, if you work at all with parents and families, this playbook is for you. So at the top of the playbook, and we're looking at it here on our website, bealearninghero.org/OST-research. At the top of the playbook is the research deck. You'll see the button here, and it's intentionally packed with data. So we learned a lot through this research project. And while I covered some of the top line insights earlier, and you saw some of the highlights in the video, I encourage you to go through the data and determine which data slides and insights would be most helpful to you in your work. You are more than welcome to use any of these slides. At Learning Heroes, we always want our research to be actionable, and we always encourage our partners to use our data and our slides. So we want to help you with that. So if there's any data slide that you would like to use in presentations or workshops or anything that you have going on, please contact us, and we're more than happy to send you the specific slide or even tailor it for your specific purpose. So then we also have a few examples in the playbook of how you can use the research. So for instance, if you're an out-of-school time provider, for example, you may want to use it to speak to parents about your program's offerings in a way that's informed by what we know resonates with parents and families. And if you work with an advocacy organization, you can use the data to promote more equitable access to high-quality programs, including reducing costs and transportation barriers identified by low-income families. Scroll down a little bit and you'll find playbook resources. So under About the Research, we have the research deck again, and stay tuned because soon we're going to actually have the video that we watched earlier. Again, we're just kind of working on a few tweaks to it, and then probably in the next couple of days, it will be part of this research page as well. And what I love about the video, as I mentioned, is it just allows you to get a feel for the key insights from the research in a really quick and compelling way. So also in the About the Research section, there are 3 one-pagers. One that talks about the research. It's a one-pager about the research and provides sort of the different stages that I talked about of the research. And then one with specific terms and definitions from the report. And finally, one that highlights the core partners that were engaged with us in this research project. So scroll down a little bit more and we have a messaging guidance one-pager. So while this isn't specific messaging, it provides some general research-based guidance in 3 categories: understanding what parents value, supporting the whole child, and increasing access. So for example, under increasing access, we highlight the need to communicate the quality features of low and no cost programs and use equitable strategies that engage families to sign up for and access these programs, specifically addressing barriers including fees, meal service, transportation, and waiting lists. Finally, we have some terrific infographics that the Hatcher Group helped us with and corresponding social media posts. So first we'll show you the toolkits quickly, and then we'll take a closer look at some of the creative graphics. So this is our social media toolkit that you can use to highlight some of the points from the research through your social media platforms. And this is available in English and Spanish. And here is a closer look at some of the infographics themselves. So we could go back to the slide deck. I think we can highlight a couple of the infographics, and there are, I think, 6 of them in total. Though this one is about what parents say are the top reasons they enroll their children in out-of-school time experiences. And this obviously is in English and Spanish. And this one is about how, despite the many benefits of OST programs, they aren't accessible for all parents and families. And so there are several others to choose from as well. These are just a few examples. And again, we encourage you to look at the full suite of resources.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing, David. It says in the chat, I agree with Patricia. Love it that it's all in one place and ready to use. That's exactly why we created this on our website. We want it to be easy and ready to use for all of you. And again, David, thanks for providing that great high-level overview of our OST playbook. And now to showcase how the playbook can actually be used in action, I'd like to bring on Helen Westmoreland, the Director of Family Engagement for the PTA, as well as Jose Rodriguez, Director of Parent and Community Engagement of UnidosUS, and Catherine Prolog-Martinez, a Senior Consultant for the Forum for Youth Investment. I do just want to give a quick reminder that throughout this presentation, please continue to put your questions in the chat, as well as your comments. Again, an interactive conversation that we're looking forward to continuing to have with you all today. And now to start with Helen. Helen, how are you today?
Hi, Kelsey. Thank you for having me. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you as well. We so appreciate you joining. And to kick it off, Helen, the PTA has been a powerful advocacy force for parents around the country. And PTA has long been a partner of Learning Heroes, which we're so excited about. And that is why we're excited to have you and so many PTAs join us on this call. I saw all of them, Helen, putting in where they're representing from and their different states. But for the PTAs that you work with, what are some of the ways your organization has been thinking about the intersection of this research that was presented today and the work that you do?
Great. Thanks, Kelsey. Well, there's a lot of ways. I think I'll call out two, and I'll start with sort of the one I don't want anyone to take for granted. And one of the things we appreciate about Learning Heroes is one of our longtime partners so much, which just is the importance of messaging. So frequently folks in different sectors will have a vernacular, often research-based, that doesn't necessarily resonate with families and communities themselves. And so I think this research really sort of shines a light when we talk about extracurriculars, right? Which is the word that families prefer. The importance of really meeting families where they are with that language, whether you're advocating for these programs or trying to recruit for them. And so I think that's an incredible value, just high level thing that Learning Heroes does in all of its research. And this is really a great step with some of the out of school time and after school work. The second thing I would say we're really thinking about is some of the findings around equitable access. So as the nation's oldest and largest child advocacy organization, National PTA, and lots of PTAs, including those on the call, I'll ask them to chime in, particularly in the Q&A later, have been advocating for after school programs in their communities. And the findings here really reinforce some of that and provide some concrete tools to do that better. One I would call out that I'm really excited about is the social media and infographic toolkit that David just went through. These are really easy ways that advocates across the country can use to just raise awareness about what is in your community and do people have access to it. So some really great stuff here.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And again, yes, the toolkit I hope can be utilized by so many to just easily get this information out to all of the advocates that are joining us today on this call. For my next question, Helen, for you, how will this research be used at the local level? And can you give us some specific examples?
Sure. I can give you a couple like hopes, right? So, and I think there are three things. So the first is we know that demand does outstrip supply in a lot of communities. And so I think at the local level, PTAs, advocates, others, if there aren't enough after school and out of school time, programs can use this data to communicate the value of these programs in ways that really mobilize parents around what we know their self-interest is, right? Which is their child. And that's what came out in this research. I would say the messaging guidance is a great tool to do that. It's an excellent way to sort of think about how are we talking about this work? How can we drive sort of a coordinated campaign at the local level to be sure that all of our kids have the programs and services they need, particularly after these past 2 years, where we know families are really hungry and needing additional supports for their kids. The second thing I would say from an advocacy point of view is that in some communities, there might be a rich fabric of extracurricular opportunities. And this is a way that PTA leaders can start asking questions about who's actually accessing those opportunities. So we know that many communities or county or city offices might have an intermediary, like an out of school time network that helps track some of this data. And if not, this to me is a really compelling set of information to be pushing and nudging on that and asking those questions of who's in our programs, who's not. If we don't know that, we should be tracking that at the community level. And then the third thing I would say is if you see disparities, if you are tracking that information, you do see disparities in the data at the local level, then community leaders, PTAs can really start being part of the problem solving process with their districts, with their providers, particularly in light of all the ESSER funds that are available that are specifically there to support kids and support kids who have had a particularly difficult time during the pandemic. So we've learned from this research that the commonality that families are looking for is around socio-emotional learning supports, particularly. And so I think advocates can really start asking questions to get to the root cause of some of those disparities. Is it because we're not actually providing programs that are meeting the needs and the most important things parents are looking for? Is it because of transportation barriers or cost barriers? I think there's a lot of great incredibly rich data here that can guide some of that analysis at the community level to start problem solving around some of these issues.
Awesome. And problem solving is exactly what we want, Helen, and when it comes to these different tools and resources that we're providing. And thanks so much for showcasing how they can be used on the ground and in the local community. Helen, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. So coming up next to join me live, I want to welcome Jose Rodriguez, Director of Parent and Community Engagement for UnidosUS. Jose, hi, how are you?
Hi, Kelsey. Good to thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thanks so much. And thank you for accepting our invitation. And to kick things off with you, Jose, UnidosUS has been leading the charge with Padres Comprometidos program, a bilingual curriculum and training that breaks down some of the barriers Latino and immigrant parents face. Now, our OST research clearly shows that the benefits that parents say their children get from OST programs, but yet so many communities, and especially Black and Brown communities and lower income families, don't always have access to these programs. So I want to ask you, Jose, from your work with families, can you discuss some of the barriers that families face in terms of accessing quality OST programs?
Yes, our Padres Comprometidos program is a parent engagement program. It's not a parenting program. And it has been especially designed to reach parents who are typically not connected to schools as a result of linguistic and cultural differences, also economic background, a negative perception of the schools within the parents themselves, or just a lack of knowledge about how to become involved in the schools. So these factors can also be attributed to the barriers that the students face in terms of accessing quality OST programs. As the video mentioned, cost, time, transportation were barriers, and which are barriers that we ourselves have seen. For example, transportation. Many of our students don't have a means to get to and from school besides the school bus. And then with the daylight savings time ending, it gets darker sooner. Some of the parents are afraid to let their children walk home in the dark or stay after school past daylight times. So that is a concern for parents. They may not have the means of transporting their kids to and from the house to the school. Another one is students may not be able to participate in OST programs because they have to work after school. They have to help the families financially. So they may be working after school, or they may have to go back to the school and take care of their younger siblings while their parents are working as well. Out of times programs also face another barrier of time. When the program is being offered, some of our sites that offer OST programs have gone from after school to early morning before school starts. But that sometimes is also a barrier, because that means getting to school on time earlier than usual. And again, transportation is an issue. So it's those are some of the barriers that our children face. Communication between the parents and the schools also, sometimes the information doesn't get to the parents, and I'm really grateful that the information that you're providing is available in Spanish, so that the parents can have access to these programs and to the information. One of our programs that is offering after school out of time programs is also doing it during their 0 hour. They work out with the schools a plan to where they offer this program as a class where the students can participate in it, because they will be able to have access to this program otherwise. So it's working creatively with the schools. Our affiliate network, many of them are community-based organizations that are themselves after-school providers. So they coordinate well with the schools to give them access to these programs as well.
Thank you so much for touching on those barriers. I think it's important for all of us to remember that as we go forward with this OST research and how we're going to be implementing it. And for your next question, Jose, I want to ask you, can you talk about how you feel this research may be helpful to the parents, parent leaders, and partners that you're currently working with?
Absolutely. This research is very helpful for our partners. As I mentioned before, a lot of our community-based organizations coordinate with the schools and with the parent leaders, so they can better inform the parents. So there's research will help us assess the families and see what how they feel about the after-school programs. They know that they're very valuable. They want their children to have access to an excellent education. And we know, and your research indicates that the more involved and engaged the students are in after-school programs, the better they will do academically. They're going to be more successful and happy, and overall, their social emotional learning is going to improve. So all these are contributing factors that the parents want their children to have access. Again, so our community-based organizations will offer this information to the parents. I want to thank Learning Heroes for being such a great partner of UnidosUS, and because it's through these programs that we give voice to our Latinx families who seldom participate in research studies. And so through this research work that you all do, and we partner together to include the voice of the Latinx families that Unidos works with. This is so important for us. And many of the families would love to access such wonderful information, but sometimes it doesn't get to them. So it's thanks to the partnership that we have with Learning Heroes that we have access to this information to share with our families. I just love the playbook, and the infographics are wonderful. I remember when I was a teacher, we had a partnership with the school where through PTA, I was able to have a bulletin board in the local grocery stores within the neighborhood. So from time to time, I would go and update the bulletin board to provide valuable information and about the after-school programs that we were offering at our school. So I think it's a great opportunity to share these infographics, print them out, post them at the grocery store, post them at the places where our Latinx families go to, where they frequent the churches, the school, the stores, the doctor's office within the community, especially right now during COVID, when a lot of our families are staying within the community. So it's very important that they get that information, and then they touch back with our community-based organization who shares more information with them. So thank you to Learning Heroes for this great opportunity and these great resources for our families.
Of course. And thank you so much for just being a great partner of ours. And I love that you personalize that example. When you're in the grocery store, go to where the community is. When you're waiting in that line, you're looking for different things to do. And if that information's there, you never know what parent that might help or what family that might help, the churches and different things of that nature. And just making sure, again, that we're getting all of this information to the actual community members. And you kind of touched on this before, but one more question for you, Jose. Just talking about the importance of the Spanish language resources, and just to hammer this point home, how do you think your organization will use the Spanish language resources in this playbook? I just want to make sure, because we were very thoughtful making sure that this was bilingual to make sure it reaches as many families as possible.
And they're excellent in Spanish, excellent resources. So I have already shared the playbook and the information, the infographics, with the affiliate network. Our Padres Comprometidos program is across 14 states, over about 40 of our affiliate organizations. So they are sharing this information with the families, and the families, especially right now. We had one of our out of school time programs that went virtual because of COVID, and so we would connect with the school and the student, but then we also got the families engaged in those activities as well. So these infographics, this information that you have provided with us, especially in Spanish, are so valuable for our affiliate network to continue sharing and get that information out in Spanish. I know I share it out in our Facebook page. A lot of our families are communicating more frequently through social media, through use of Instagram, through use of Facebook. So I share this information with them, and they're very appreciative because this is information that they wouldn't have access to otherwise.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jose. This project has been a labor of love, but when we get to hear how it's being used in practice, and that makes us all happy. And again, why partners like you are so important to make sure that we're spreading this information. Learning Heroes does this because we want it to get it out. It's not just for us, it's for everyone here to use and utilize. Thanks again so much, Jose, for joining me. And now I'd like to welcome up Catherine Flog Martinez from the Forum for Youth Investment.
Hey, Kelsey.
Hi, Catherine. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited for the conversation.
It's our pleasure. Thanks again so much for accepting. And Catherine, for your first question, it's no secret that our organization and yours goes way back right on this OST research. In fact, it was Karen Pittman who had the first vision for this research. Your organization has always been a great thought partner of ours on this research and listening to the needs of parents, which is so important. So to that point, Catherine, Forum FYI and the Readiness Projects have already used this research in so many ways, but can you highlight particular ways that you have used this research?
Absolutely, Kelsey. As you said, Karen Pittman, who's our co-founder at the Forum and one of the coordinating partners at the Readiness Projects, has just been giddy with excitement to have this data available. After the Developing Life Skills research came out, she really wanted to know more about the parent perspective on that intersection of SEL and out of school time. So now with our work in the Readiness Projects, we're really focused among our 4 priorities is asserting the essential role of all adults in all settings. And we continue to encourage communities to really think about how they can think, see, hear, and act differently. And that definitely includes that parent voice piece. So if it's okay with you, I would love to actually just share an example of how we have used the data. So what you see on your screen now is an early slide that we've been using in our Readiness Projects presentations to really talk about kind of our traditional construct of learning. You have a school day, you have after school, and you have summer. And you have these separate and distinct spaces. And in summer, you start to get a little bit of more connection between the two. Well, we've been encouraging people to really think about how they can blur the lines. And instead of thinking about these spaces, think about complementary delivery systems and learning modalities. And as Karen and I have been giving these presentations, one of the things that we talk about is that sometimes our language can actually be a barrier. That talking about school and out of school time automatically makes people put up those walls and see the difference in the spaces. So this slide from the Learning Heroes data deck, from your data deck, really stood out to us to say, gosh, parents actually aren't using that language that creates that disconnect and that barrier. Well, it's so commonplace for those of us in the field, it's not the term that parents think of. So we took this and overlaid it with the slides that you just saw. So now in that sequence, instead of just the 2-slide animation, which we have made a little fancier since this version, but you see right on top the data that says our language can actually help us move in this direction. It's not the only thing, but it can help us. This set of slides is then followed up by additional data that really talks about the ways families are currently engaging in out-of-school time programs to help make that case about the importance of students having, young people having these opportunities, on why and what families are choosing. And these data points help really make it real for communities as they start to think about why would we want to blur the lines between what have been 2 really strong systems. Another way that we have used the data already is in articles and lifting up our ideas development work. So Karen Pittman and Linda Darling Hammond coupled the Learning Heroes data with data from the Walton Family Foundation to really make the case for why parents are asking for bold change and whole child redesign. So we've been able to take the data and connect it to messages and ideas in presentations and in writing and in our conversations with partners and communities.
So great to hear. You took the data and you connected it to messages and ideas, right? You're giving life, you're telling the story of the data and actually helping to implement that. And For your next question, I mean, it's no secret that COVID-19 has fundamentally shifted the relationship between schools, families, and community-based organizations. But how can the resources in a playbook support community efforts to build forward together?
Such a great question. So for us, when we talk about building forward together, we're really thinking about the return to school, the return to our, maybe it's not a return, to our new version of normal, and thinking about how instead of building back in our silos or our unique sectors, we're connecting across the learning and development ecosystem so that out of school time providers, parents, communities are working and coming together. So when we work with communities around building forward together, we start with reflection. What worked in your community during the pandemic? What are the challenges that are still there? And when you think about what worked in particular, what are the connections to community-based organizations and families that were part of that? So as the communities do that reflection, bringing in the playbook and saying, okay, it's not our local data necessarily, but let's look at what parents are telling us. What worked for them? We see that they're feeling more confident about their kids' ability to return to the classroom. Why is that? Let's ask some of our local parents, or let's ask some of our local parents these same questions and dig in more deeply. And it also helps with the communication around social emotional learning. So part of what we're encouraging with Build Forward Together is also that we not just focus on academics, but we think about academic remediation, but we also think about academic acceleration. We not just think about trauma-informed response, but we think about that in conjunction with building social emotional skills. And the playbook messaging really makes the case for that, that there are these roles, and David talked about it before, these interconnected roles between school, home, and community-based organizations, extracurricular programs that can help us accomplish all of that. Doing everything right now is such a daunting task. For me as a parent, for those of us in the school setting, for those of us in out of school time programs. And when we can instead think about the role that each of us can play and really clearly articulate the value we play as partner organizations, the supports we can provide to school and kids, the better off we're going to be in reframing and reshaping the supports and work we do with young people moving forward.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for that. Like you said, thinking about the role that each of us plays, because each of us do play a role in this work. And I do want to thank you, Helen, Jose, you, Catherine, Helen, and Jose for joining me again on today's webinar and just providing great research into the learnings from this playbook and how it can be used. Please keep putting your questions in the chat box. We'll be sure to try to get to all of them as we begin to start to wrap up this webinar. But before we wrap up today's webinar, we would like to hear from you once more in the chat box. And we would like to bring now the audience question up on screen, and we are hoping to hear from all of you on the call. So the question is, what are your biggest takeaways from today? And again, today is not over yet, but just from what you've heard, what are your biggest takeaways from today? Please place those answers in the chat box. All right. Again, just anything that today that you just were like, wow, that was great. Please put that in the chat box. There's some of the biggest takeaways that you pulled from all of the great content that David went over and that all of our great panelists went over. And it's great to see all these answers come in. Again, we really appreciate you all keeping this conversation interactive with us, because it is a conversation where we're all building and learning together. And as you all are doing that, again, we'd like to thank you all once again for joining us. Please continue to let us know if you have any questions, as all the panelists will actually be rejoining me. So please feel free to share any questions that you have in the chat box now. We're going to work our hardest to be sure to address them. And as we get the panelists back on stage, we have so many great questions coming in, which I think should make all of us very happy, Catherine, David, and Jose. And I think if you're seeing the chat box, you're seeing all of the great learnings that have happened. And now that we have all the panelists back up with us, Jose, I hope you're ready, because the first question is for you. The question is, have you seen or heard of good examples of schools or districts partnering with OST programs to help meet the specific needs and address barriers faced by Spanish-speaking families?
I think one of the first things that we need to do is start forming meaningful relationships between the families, the schools, and the community partners. And I'm giving an example of one of our affiliates here in San Antonio, where I'm at. One of our affiliates takes it's an after-school provider, but they take the after-school programs to the apartments where the families live, so that their children don't have to travel. They don't have to go anywhere else. They're already in the location where they live. So I think that's a very creative way. Another way is to collaborate with the school, as we have done before with our after-school programs that also offer it early in the morning. They offer it at different times. They have surveyed the parents to find out what is the best time so that their children can be able to participate in these valuable programs. So collaborating with the schools, surveying the parents to find out what are the best times to serve. Also, some of our affiliates are offering transportation cards to the older children who can take public transportation as well. But that I think it's so important that we build these meaningful relationships between the families, the schools, and the community partners.
Yes, those meaningful relationships will carry us, I think, very far. And the key word in that, meaningful relationships. Thank you so much, Jose, for answering that. And I do want to thank Helen again for joining us. She wasn't able to join us on this panel part because Helen is busy. She's doing so much great research and sharing so much information that she had to run to another meeting. But if you have questions for her, please put them in the chat box and we'll be sure that we get back an answer to you. The next question is for you, Catherine. And the question is, as new funding is available to increase access to extracurricular programs, does the Forum for Youth Investment or others in your network have plans to work with educators and policymakers to make the case for expanded learning opportunities?
Yeah, such a great question. And I actually think that the question demonstrates a little bit of the answer. And I saw many of our After School Alliance colleagues on the call and want to give shout outs to them and many other organizations who actually worked very, very hard earlier this calendar year, tail end of last, to advocate for funding to be available to be used in both the out of school time space as well as in traditional schooling. And so there are conversations currently underway at a national level where organizations that focus on policy and practice are coming together to think about how do we continue to encourage states to really think about how they choose to allocate funding and prioritize extracurricular programming. We know and can see that parents place really high value in this. So I'm going to share a resource in the chat that After School Alliance has led the charge on, which is a website that helps give more of the evidence base around expanded learning opportunities and how the funding can most easily be used. I would encourage folks on the call that are interested to reach out to their 50-state after school network. As you mentioned before, reach out to their local intermediaries. And if you don't have a local intermediary, use the playbook as your starting point for the conversation with educators and policymakers, both about the important role that extracurricular programming can play and also the value placed on social emotional learning and really building life skills in young people.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Catherine. And again, she put the link in the chat. So please, please, please be sure to utilize that link to accompany all the great information that Catherine is sharing with us today on this webinar. And now for you, David, the next question is coming in. As we think about sharing the playbook, is there an opportunity for organizations to provide feedback or possible ideas for additional resources?
Absolutely. And I encourage all of you as you dig deeper or dive deeper into the playbook to take a look at what's there and what's not there. You know, what in your work would be really helpful to you. And please send us a note about it. Again, if you email us at ostresearch@learningheroes.org, we'll be able to get your feedback and insights and potentially continue to grow this resource so that we have more assets available depending on your specific needs. So I really encourage you to let us know what you like, what you need more of, what you need less of, and what would really help you convey the really important insights from this research in your work.
Yeah, so also, again, we put that email in the chat box as well. And as David said, let us know what you want more of, what you need less of. We are working with you all to make sure this playbook can be very useful to all of the great work that you all are already doing. David, we have another question for you from Annalise Martinez. Do we know if the realignment of advocacy materials from OST to extracurriculars would hold true with funders and policymakers?
So that is a really good question. And that's something that we've talked a lot about internally. And I have a feeling a lot of the people on the call would have some things to say about this as well. What I found in a lot of the research that Learning Heroes has done throughout the years, including this research, is that different groups of people and different people talk about the same thing in different ways. And so while we found that extracurricular is by far what parents call out of school time programs, then that's important knowledge for us to know so that when we're talking to parents, we can use extracurricular. We still know in philanthropic community and in the nonprofit community, a lot of the times we're talking about out of school time programs. And as you'll hear, we've sort of used it interchangeably today in the past hour, because I know that different people kind of use different terms for the same thing. I would say for the most part, the funders that I've talked to, the people in this space are using terms like out of school time. But when we're talking to parents, it's really important that we talk to parents in language that's familiar to them. And what's familiar to them in terms of these programs is extracurricular.
Thank you, David, helping us to showcase meeting parents where they're at. And David, we have another question from you. This one's from Sierra Bookins. To what extent are folks connecting this to the recovery after the pandemic? That's been a big push for our parent leaders here in California.
So I think that's a great question, and that's yet to be seen, but I think that this is really, really important research and data connected to the recovery at this time when there's, and I believe I mentioned this earlier, when there's more funding available, more government funding available through ARP and ESSER and other forms. It feels like this data, and especially sort of the messaging in terms of how we promote out of school time programs, it can be incredibly valuable.
Awesome.
And I know also, Kelsey, I've seen a couple of other questions that come in that are specific to the data. So we have several questions specific to the data. And, I just want to put it out there. I am not a researcher. I'm a communicator. So I don't want to get myself in trouble by answering kind of really detailed data questions. But I do encourage you, if you have a question about the research, and there are some really good ones, to make sure you go to the playbook and you send an email to ostresearch@learningheroes.org. Edge Research, unfortunately, is not on this call. They couldn't be on this webinar, but they are checking in with us regularly. They know that we have this opportunity for people to weigh in, to ask questions. And so if you ask a research-based question, we'll be able to get back to you probably within 24 hours with the answer to your question. So we really encourage you to do that. I do see that there's a question, are there any remarkable differences and approaches in the data between school site OST programs and off-site OST programs? And while I know we talk to OST providers, in both school site programs and programs that were offsite, and we also talked to parents whose kids were involved in OST programs that were in school versus out of school. I don't know if we have that specific cut available about the differences between their perceptions of OST programs, but that is a good question that we can definitely check with Edge on. I do know that there were some really interesting, significant differences between perceptions of parents whose children were in OST programs and those parents of children who were not in OST programs. And one of the things that is in the video, if you remember, is that parents whose kids are in OST programs are saying that their children are getting higher grades, that they're more prepared for the next school year and for college. And so there's really some interesting data between parents whose kids are in OST programs versus those who aren't. But again, some of the other questions that are more detailed research questions, I encourage you to send to ostresearch@learningheroes.org, and we'll certainly get back in touch with you.
Awesome. Thank you, David. You're just such a great communicator that they wanted to ask you the research questions because you communicated, David, so well. And for
I
our
don't know about that, but thanks for saying that.
And for our last question from the chat, I want to give this one again. Please put your questions in. We'll be sure to answer them. We just want to be mindful of everyone's time on this webinar. This one, any of the panelists can answer. It's from Dustin Pappas, and sorry, apologies for pronouncing your last name wrong. In paving this road for learning in OST, how can we measure access so the path does not lead to more inequality?
Jose, do you want to give that one a shot?
I think using the playbook and assessing the parent will give us a good measure, especially in our within the Latinx community that we serve with UnidosUS, and making sure that we get the right information, the right questions. So this would be a good project for us to do and assess the parents, to make sure that this does not lead to more inequality within the OST programs and the Latinx community.
Something in another one of the data points that we've used frequently is one that actually looks at the differences and barriers in terms of OST participation, and it couples with other research in the field, but that cost is among the largest barriers to participation. And so given that parents and the data identify so much value in participation in these programs, if cost is the barrier, it really gives us an advocacy agenda to say we need to think about not just eliminating cost as the barrier, but even further lifting up the powerful opportunity of these programs in our lower socioeconomic communities and our communities that currently don't have as much access to these types of programs and resources.
Exactly, and that was the Pew Research Center also has done a lot of studies on OST programs and the Latino community. And that is something that I had looked at before coming in preparation for this to see what the barriers were. So there are studies, and thank you for that information.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you both for that. And just real quick, I just saw that we got another question from Jen Reinhardt. Is there variability among parents of kids in different ages in terms of what terminology resonates most? For example, I could imagine that extracurricular has more resonance with parents of older youth, while some of the other terms might resonate more with parents of younger kids. And I do think that's the case, Jen, if I remember correctly from the research, that there is a difference between parents of older kids using the term extracurricular more than parents of younger kids. Again, we'd be able to kind of do that specific cut and provide more detailed information through Edge research, but I do think that there's definitely a difference there.
Awesome. Thank you again, Catherine, Jose, and David for joining me. And again, please keep getting your questions in. I do just want to reiterate the email for more questions, or if you have any feedback. It's not ostresearch@learningheroes.org. It's actually OST Playbook at learningheroes.org. So again, OST Playbook at learningheroes.org. And just as a reminder to you all, the playbook is live on our website where it can be readily accessed. So please, again, go to our website, access this playbook, look through it, download it. We are hoping our sector and the broader education field takes advantage of all of the learnings from this playbook. Once again, thank you so much to the Wallace Foundation for funding this research, and Karen Pittman for helping to lead this research. Thanks again so much for joining us. And we hope you all enjoy utilizing our playbook. And we're going to close out with some good music and some good vibes. And again, please keep putting all of your questions and comments in, and we'll be sure to get back to you all in a timely manner. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. Bye.